the second speech session, keynote speech session. Second speaker, as you know, is the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He must be the greatest contributor to awakening the human beings in terms of climate risks. Since he has held so many important positions and make great achievements in the various fields, I would have to spend the entire 45 minutes allowed for this session to enumerate all of them. So just as for the first speaker, I introduced him by reading his brief personal profile included in the program handbook with a small revision. Now I'll read his brief profile. Mr. Ban Ki-moon is a South Korean diplomat who was 8th Secretary General of the United Nations from January 2007 to December 2016. Before becoming Secretary General, Mr. Ban was a career diplomat in South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in the United Nations. After working as a diplomat for 34 years, he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Korea in 2004. As the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban's priorities were to mobilize world leaders around the set of new global challenges, from climate change and economic upheaval to pandemics and increasing pressures involving food, energy, and water. One of the Secretary General's first major initiatives was the 2007 Climate Change Summit, followed by extensive diplomatic efforts that have helped put the issue at the forefront of a global agenda. At the height of the food, energy, and economic crisis in 2008, Mr. Ban successfully appealed to the G20 for 1 trillion financing package for developing countries. Under Mr. Ban's leadership in 2015, countries adopted a set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all as part of a new sustainable agenda. He has won numerous awards nationally and internationally from governments, private and public organizations. Mr. Ban is still very active in dealing with world issues for people with various positions, such as chairs of Ban Ki-moon's Foundation for a Better Future, Global Green Growth Institute, the IOC Ethics Commissions, and so on. Personally, I had a chance to watch near him his soft but strong leadership with passion, expertise, belief, and thoughtfulness for others when I was a member of the Advisory Committee of National Council on Climate and Air Quality for 2 years, of which Mr. Ban had served as a chair. It is said that the council had been successful in helping the government to combat the fine dust and climate change in Korea. Now it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. Ban Ki-moon. Please.
Thank you for your very kind introduction, Professor Emeritus of Dongguk University. And I'm still remembering and grateful for your contribution when I was working as a chairman of National Council on Climate and Air Quality. And in addition to that, you are well respected by many Korean people as well as abroad. And thank you very much for your very kind introduction about me. And I'd like to recognize Dr. Kwon Oh-sang, Chair of the AAERE 2021 Local Organizing Committee, and Dr. Hong Jong-ho, President of AAERE, and also Dean Jang Pan-sik, College of Agriculture and Animal Biotechnology. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and those who are watching these discussions through Zoom. Thank you very much for your participation. Before I begin, I'd like to get your understanding that since I'm going to speak about at least 20 minutes, let me just take off my mask for clarity of my delivery. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and honor to speak to you today on the occasion of the 10th Annual Congress of the Asian Association of Environmental Resources and Economics, AAERE. And it is my privilege to deliver these remarks at such an important juncture for all the people and our planet as we collectively strive to urgently address climate risk and ensure sustainable development in Asia and beyond. Indeed, we currently stand on the precipice of a period of great change and even danger, one that will have profound implications for the global economy, environment, governments, industries, as well as future trajectory of humanity. Since 2010, AAERE has served as a dynamic and forward-thinking scholarly platform for environmental, resource, energy, and climate economists. It serves as a timely opportunity for sharing knowledge and best practices with a view towards enhancing the Sustainable Development Agenda for the ASEAN-Asian region. And I am pleased to see that the AAERE 2021 has expanded beyond East Asian, welcoming participants from 17 countries, including Bangladesh, Australia, and Nepal, who will be giving presentations at this year's conference. Everyone gathered here today has a valuable insight to share and admirably working to strengthen academic engagement and offer meaningful policy advice to address climate risk and elevate sustainable development. I believe this is essential considering the scale of challenges before us to protect the environment as the climate crisis deepens and help ensure sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves at the center of a variety of converging crises and increased uncertainty. The ongoing pandemic continues to upend our economies, societies, and whole spectrums of our lives. At the same time, our planet is on fire, both literally and figuratively, with the climate crisis deepening as the sea level rise, temperatures surge, floods rage and wildfires burn. COVID-19 and other global crises, such as climate change, have underlined our fundamental interconnectedness. They have also made it clear that we need global solutions born out of cooperation and partnership to holistically address the great challenges that we face. I'm emphasizing that this is a global challenge requiring global solution. Not a single country, however powerful one may be, however resourceful one may be, can handle this alone. Even United States, the richest and most powerful country, cannot handle this one. China, of course, cannot handle this one. All the countries and people around the world must do this one same one. We must put all our hands on the deck together. That's always message which I have been repeatedly speaking out to the world's people. And such solutions must be rooted in sustainability and inclusivity and centered on enhancing the health, resilience of people, communities, and most importantly, our planet where we live in. Beyond oversized impacts on the global economy, COVID-19 has also amplified existing inequalities in health, labor, housing, food, gender, and other key areas. COVID-19 has also offered us a glimpse of the global disruptions that will soon arise from climate change. These include, but are not limited to, elevated public health perils, mass displacement, turmoil to supply chains, increased conflict, heightened risks for insurers and index funds, and protracted economic crisis. Both pandemics and climate change, I've been repeatedly saying that pandemic and climate are not separate. They are just two sides of one coin, two sides of one coin. They are tightly interconnected. Had we cared our environment, had we done much more on climate crisis, we would not be suffering from pandemic as we are now. That means that we have neglected our civil duties, and political leaders and business leaders, they have neglected their duties as politicians and business leaders. And as the world has rightly focused on the ongoing COVID-19 crisis as a dangerous variant spread, climate change is continuing to alter the character of the earth and create increasingly dire risks and instability. Indeed, the disruptive superstorms, out of control wildfires, historic droughts, boiling heat waves, and catastrophic flooding are all expanding in both frequency and intensity. They don't care where you are living, whether in developed countries or developing countries. Look at the case, the flooding, recent flooding, which just swept, inundated Germany, Belgium, and Netherlands, richest countries, most prosperous countries. As such, we must increase our efforts to protect ourselves, our communities, and the planet from the existential threats that will bring. In this regard, today, I am excited to speak to you about how we can succeed in achieving this. First, I will underscore the reality of the ongoing climate crisis and its impact, as well the great importance of international cooperation and partnership to urgently implement the Paris Climate Agreement. Second, I will discuss the necessity of conjoining such efforts with the climate adaptation and the UN Sustainable Development Goals to help chart a brighter future for all. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is fueling insecurity, conflict, refugee flows, and public health risks all around the world. And these threats do not discriminate. All nations are and will continue to be endangered by them as the world continues to warm. As a result of climate change, rising sea levels are an existential threat to many small island developing states, as well as some of the world's most populous and economically important cities around the world. While serving as a Secretary General, I have been traveling many small island developing countries in Pacific and Caribbean. I was told by old people that one day they see suddenly some small island disappeared from their eyes. And look at the case of small island Kiribati. The highest point is 3 meters high above sea level. And my car, the car tires was, touching all the waters. It was running on the water. The streets are always covered with water, sea waters. So it is rising daily. As you may know, scientifically, scientists say that the sea level is rising every year 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters. That means in 10 years, 3 centimeters. 3 centimeters. But depending upon the locations, and if we neglect our duties to address climate crisis, the sea level will rise minimum 60 centimeters to 3 to 4 meters by the end of this century. This is a serious alarm. If you just think that suppose the sea level has risen 60 centimeters, then Korean Peninsula will be useless. The highest building in Seoul, 63 building, will be inundated. Just 60 centimeters will make all these high buildings useless. You cannot approach, you cannot live in that building. Electricity will be out. You have no access and no livability. So we have to be very serious about this. Historic rain recently deluged central China, trapping passengers in subways, killing dozens, and displacing over 200,000 people. In India, thousands were reduced when the Ganges River flooded after days of torrential rains. This summer, we have been witnessing much of the Mediterranean engulfed in menacing flames as wildfires burn out of control in dangerous dry conditions in Greece, Algeria, Turkey, Lebanon, Tunisia, Italy, and elsewhere. And the areas of Middle East and South Asia are now experiencing heat waves so severe that doctors are sounding the alarm about the capacity of humans to live physically, withstand them in the years ahead. But warming is not just a future threat. A landmark study recently released in the scientific journal Nature says that nearly 37% of all global heat-related deaths can now be blamed on human-caused climate change. How can we mitigate these threats? Countries in Asia like China, Korea, India, Australia, Japan, or others certainly cannot do it alone, as I said, nor the Western countries such as the United States, European Union, and United Kingdom. What is needed is an unprecedented global effort propelled by multilateralism, solidarity, and global partnership. With this in mind, I'm of the view that we must urgently step up our collective efforts to cut global emissions and implement the Paris Climate Agreement. During my time as Secretary General, I'm proud to have prioritized climate change as the top most important issues during my tenure's time. And I have made some modest success in having Paris Climate Change Agreement adopted after so many years of negotiation. And I was also proud to have announced the Sustainable Development Goals with 17 goals. I think these two announcements and agreements were the most far-reaching, most ambitious visions the United Nations has ever presented in its 75 years history. The Paris Climate Change Agreement, signed by 195 countries in 2015, offers us a clear game plan to confront the serious threats to our world. It set visible targets to impede rising temperatures, constrict greenhouse gas emissions, and spur climate-resilient development and green growth. I will always remember the long days and nights of negotiating in Paris, culminating with an electric final light when we finally secured commitments from the world leaders. But agreement itself may be important, but the more important is that we have to implement, make it into action. The road to Paris started years earlier, and there were many obstacles along the way to overcome. Finally, I was able to convince the United States and also China, India, Brazil, and South Africa. Those are the key 6 countries, particularly China, Brazil, India, South Africa. They are known as basic countries. Without their help, without their participation, this climate change would be meaningless. So I have had all 195 countries on board at that time. Now, are we on the right course? I'm afraid to say that we have not done much enough. That means that because of Trump administration, 4 years, this whole international community was in disarray. Multilateralism was in disarray, and US was not moving, then China would not move. Now with the Joe Biden coming into power and returning to Paris Climate Change Agreement, I think we have the right moment to strike and decisive actions on climate change agreement. During my time, it will take a long time for me to explain to you what I have done. I have never spared my time. I have never spared any places where I was able to witness myself the impacts of climate changes. I have visited 5 times Arctic regions, Antarctica and Arctic. Would there be any Koreans who have visited at least once? There may be some. I know that the KBS reporter was with me, so he was one. And there are some scientists in Arctic, that is a Sejong scientific base, and also in Arctic region, there are Dasan science base. Other than that, starting from president or ministers, I don't think anybody has ever visited these Arctic regions. And I have visited Amazon river basin, where rampant deforestations are still taking place. I visited Kalimantan Mountain in Indonesia. Please go there. There's still rampant deforestations are taking place. This is what I have been really trying to do. Together, on the ground visit reinforced my belief that the climate crisis represented humankind's biggest challenge, biggest threat for us, for our succeeding generations, and our planet Earth, where we are living in. I have been speaking out. Look, that we don't have plan B because we don't have planet B either. They are now sending some satellites to Mars, moons, but how long will it take for human beings to be able to settle to another planet? This is the last planet where we are living in. We will have to live. That means we have to care ourselves for our environment. Doing so will be the difference between charting a secure and prosperous future for our future generations. I think we have our moral responsibility to make sure that this world is sustainable for our many succeeding generations to come. With this in mind, to faithfully implement the Paris Agreement and push it even further, all countries, industries, stakeholders need to urgently expand their ambitions in cutting emissions and expediting the rapid decarbonizing of the global economy. And leading environmental, resource, energy, and climate economists like yourselves, the distinguished AAERE 2021 participants, have a crucial role to play. Indeed, we need on all of our society approach underpinned by partnership and cooperation to implement the Paris Agreement, achieve net zero emission by 2050, and secure a brighter future for all. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in addition to mitigating climate change and decarbonizing the economy, we must also come together to elevate adaptation. There are two policy issues. One is mitigation and adaptation. I think we have done mitigation some because it has affected us. So we know that how to do it. But we have to have wisdom to invest for the future. This is adaptation that really makes a lot of difference. How to make adaptation policies much more invested. Now we are spending about less than 10% of our resources and political energy on adaptation, while we know that something flooding happened, that we know that we have to really repair. For that, we have spent almost 90% of resources. But if we are wise enough to invest for the future, then we'll be able to prevent. We may not be able to prevent 100% because this is a nature's power. God's willing. But at least we can make ourselves much safer, much more prosperous if we invest wisely. In fact, I am now currently working as a chairman of the Global Center on Adaptation, headquartered in the Netherlands. And I'm working with the world leaders on this. We are really trying to urge world leaders to be more smart, to be more future-oriented, to invest more resources on adaptation. Look at the case of Bangladesh in 1991, in 1970s until 1991. The one cyclone sometimes has killed more than 130,000 people, devastated the country, already poor. Bangladesh is still poor, already poor. As a Secretary General, I have been urging Prime Minister Hasina and government leaders, please make your riverbanks straight, raise the riverbanks, and make more investment and shelters, etc., etc. These days, they experience, I think, without fail, every year, cyclones, every year. Now, the number of people dead dying from these cyclones these days, less than 100. Even one people's life will be very precious, very important. But look at the difference between 100, less than 100, and 130,000 people a year in just 2 days. This is what I am also asking, much more importance on adaptation. Now, the statistics and the study said that if we invest $1.7 trillion, then after 10 years, we'll be able to see the result of more than $7 trillion. If we invest wisely on infrastructure, I talked about the small island developing states. If they plant mangroves, then they can prevent this island soil from washed away by tides. These are small. And highland agriculture and water resources, these are small, looks small, but it will have a huge impact, huge benefit for humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, at the same time, we need to expand efforts to achieve the UN's Sustainable Development Goals with the 17 targets. In fact, these include climate change. 17 goals include virtually whole spectrums of our life, of our nature, and everything. If we are able to implement all these 17 goals by the end of 2030, I'm sure that we'll be living in a much, much better, safer, more prosperous world. Climate change is number 13, goal number 13. When we were negotiating these Sustainable Development Goals, because of the importance and urgency, we just took out climate change issue and had the negotiations. Of course, everything was negotiated, but treaty-based agreement. So this is a treaty. This must be implemented, while all other 16 Sustainable Development Goals may be regarded as a political declaration, like plans. Plans can be implemented or sometimes not. Korean government has been making in the past 5-year socio-economic development plans. Each 5 years, every 5 years. That has made South Korea much, much prosper economically, socially. But that was not the laws. They were plans, political decision. But climate change agreement, Paris Agreement, is the treaty. That's a must. You must fulfill this one. But unfortunately, people do not understand. And leaders, political leaders and business leaders are not doing much enough on this matter. Now, nearly 6 years since their adoption, the SDGs have made tangible progress on bettering maternal mortality rates, combating poverty and hunger, and improving quality of water and sanitation. These are something which we can be proud, but much, much more needs to be done. The SDG 17 highlights a partnership. What I'm also asking is that you have to render all your hands, all your time and energy, resources to make sure that all these climate change agreement and sustainable development goals are implemented by 2030. Indeed, we need, as I said, an all hands on the deck approach, where everyone joins together in partnership to synergize ownership, participation, and vital involvement from all people and all sectors of our all societies. Additionally, they can help bring all nations and people together in cooperation and partnership to chart a more sustainable, inclusive, resilient, and prosperous future. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen. In this age of pandemics, climate crisis, and deepening inequality, I firmly believe that we must recommit ourselves to multilateral cooperation born out of global partnership to solve the multifaceted challenges we are now facing. Global challenges require global solutions, as I said, and such solutions can only be realized through scaled up political, diplomatic, corporate, academic, scientific, and civil society cooperation at all levels across borders and seas. We need increased cooperation to adapt and solve the climate crisis and implement the Paris Agreement. We need increased cooperation to achieve the SDGs. And we need increased cooperation to fight against the vaccine inequity and decisively defeat COVID-19 before even more dangerous variants mutate and threaten us all. As such, I humbly call upon you, the professors and scientists and students and business leaders, and also members of eminent AAERE 2021 participants to collaborate with other leaders, government officials, industries, and key stakeholders to take concrete action towards minimizing climate risk, achieving the UN SDGs, and furthering the global transition to a sustainable and decarbonized economy. COVID-19 has underlined our inherent interconnectedness. We are all in this together, and we all need to ensure that UN's global goals must be implemented. Today's interrelated global challenges respect no borders. Our actions to ensure a livable and thriving planet and in pursuit of sustainable development for our future generations supplies must transcend all frontiers. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just urging you again, let us work together to make this world sustainable, free from all this risk coming from climate change. For political leaders, they have a very important political responsibility. Us, professors and students and business leaders, I think we have our moral responsibility so that our succeeding generations can live sustainably with our sustainable planet. Thank you very much for your participation, and I'm asking you to join your hands to work together to make this world better for all. Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ban, for your outstanding speech regarding the climate change issue. Your message with the warning and the suggestions on climate crisis is clear and realistic and so persuasive, since they all come from your real world experience during your long diplomat period. I was impressed by one word by you in your talks. We don't have a plan B because we don't have a planet B either. That was a really good sentence. So now we have a short Q&A session for you. Actually, we have two questioners. Those are the former presidents of AAERE, and so we have received from them with recorded videos in advance. So the one from one is the first one is Dr. Daiji Shah from Academia Sinica, and then the second person is Changsi Chu from Peking University. So why don't you show the first video?
It is my great honor to have the chance to read Dr. Ban's keynote speech in advance and exchange my thoughts with Dr. Ban in this important conference. As Dr. Ban said repeatedly in this keynote speech, we need global solutions born out of cooperation and partnership to address the significant challenges of COVID-19 and the climate change that we are facing right now. We are fortunate to have Dr. Ban as the UN Secretary General from 2007 to 2016, led the nations around the world to reach several critical international agreements, including the Paris Climate Agreements and the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. However, the very nature of climate change as a global and intergenerational public externality makes signatory countries reluctant to implement these international climate agreements. Just as Dr. Ban has said in his speech, the just released UNIPCC climate report paints a devastating picture of a worsening global climate crisis that is now inevitable, unprecedented, and irreversible. My only question is that how to make or induce all countries, industries, and stakeholders to cooperatively expand their ambitions in speeding up the rapid decarbonization of the global economy to meet the goals of zero net emissions by 2050 and no more than 1.5 degrees temperature rise under the Paris Agreement. This is also a question that we all environmental economists should think real hard to find solutions. Thank you very much.
Please make a comment on his question.
Thank you, Professor Daiji Shaw, for your very important questions. You mentioned that the IPCC has made a recent report. That was, I think, last week. It's much more alarming among so many IPCC's assessment report. This is a special report. The gist is that, the question is that while we have been striving to limit the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. But at least by 2050, the discovery, scientific discovery, is that already 1.2 degrees has already risen. And that means we have less than 0.4 or 0.3 degrees left. Can we do that within 30 years? This is really very difficult challenges. And we have to listen to the recommendations and findings of scientists. There was some skeptics on climate issues at the level of political leaders, even business leaders. But the science has made it now abundantly, completely clear that climate change is the one which is now affecting our lives and planet Earth. Therefore, we have to do all the best efforts to meet the target of 2050 net zero. Fortunately, there is a big, much movement rising among developing countries. There were at least 120 countries who declared their readiness to realize carbon neutrality by 2050 during Spanish Madrid COP meeting just 2 years ago. But there are not many countries who have really clearly politically declared. Like the European Union, they are ready. United States, Japan, China has done it by 2060. And Republic of Korea, the President Moon Jae-in announced on October 28th last year that Korea would meet the target of carbon neutrality by 2050. When I was a chairman of National Council on Climate and Air Quality, I made the strong recommendation at that time that we must meet the deadline by 2050 of this carbon neutrality, as was declared publicly to the world. Now, frankly speaking, I am very much concerned by the decreasing will of the Korean government and decreasing will of the world's people. Now let's talk about only Korea. Recently, the Decarbonization Commission established by President Moon has announced that they proposed 3 options. The first option is to let the 7 coal-fired power stations just continue beyond 2050. That means Korea will be able to complete only 96%, not 100% carbon neutrality. Second option, we may phase out all 60 coal-fired power stations by that time, but use LNGs and other sources of energy, leaving 3%. That means 97% will be able to. Third option, of course, zero emission by 2050. The president has made 5 times confirmed that we will finish by 2050 carbon neutrality. First, he announced on October 28 last year. Second, he reaffirmed during his participation in President Biden's Earth Summit on April 22nd. Then third, he announced once more during P4G Summit, which he hosted himself in Seoul, where many world leaders participated. Then fourth, he announced in his summit meeting with President Biden in Washington in May, And in June, he announced again during G7 summit in London. 5 times President has announced that we will hit the target. Now the Commission, Carbon Neutrality Commission established by the President has announced 3 options. Most probably, I'm afraid that they may choose from A or B, not C. This is what I am deeply concerned. And then this carbon neutrality by 2050 is something which will go through 6 more presidencies in Korea, starting from next year's election. The 6 more presidents must have as strong as commitment as had been already announced by President Moon. But from the beginning now, I'm afraid that we are just losing our commitment and passion. This is something, but Korea has been regarded as sort of one of the climate villains. 기후 악당 in Korean. This is a shame. So I'm urging again, I think academic institutions like yourselves should really speak out and make sure that political leaders keep their promises and make sure that 120 countries who have expressed their willingness to do that meet their target by 2050. Then otherwise, we'll have no hope. By the end of this century, the scientists are warning that the sea level rise will go up to minimum 60 centimeters to 4 to 5 meters. That's the end of our planet, end of our lives. That we must make sure that this must be done. And I really count as one of the citizens, global citizens, I think you have to raise your voices, challenge your political business leaders. I was also concerned that the business communities have been raising concerns that that's too high. That's too high for them. But we have to use all possible resources, energy resources. We have to really use all different reasonable energy mixes. I'll stop here because there may be some other questions. Thank you very much.
I think Dr. Shah, I'm sure he is satisfied with your comment. And the second person is from Peking University, Shichu Chang. Please show us the video.
Your Majesty, this is Zhang Shiqiu, a professor at Peking University, China. Very much appreciate for sharing your insights regarding the global sustainability. If I may, I would like to ask you questions and would like to have your comments on the following. It is likely that COVID-19 impacts and recovery will last far longer than we thought. What would you comment on the key obstacles for global green recovery, and what are the most important and fundamental issues needs to be addressed? The newly released IPCC report stated that the Earth is warming faster than previously thought. Based on your observation on global collaboration on COVID and climate change, could you please comment on the current failures of global governance to address those global threats, and how to improve the global environmental governance to address the global actions on mitigation and adaptation? Thank you very much.
When it comes to global governance, I think we have already established a good global governance. We have climate change, Paris Climate Change Agreement. We have 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and many governments have expressed their willingness and strong political will to address this climate change. Now, on top of all the difficulties, COVID-19 has made really upended whole spectrums of our life. COVID-19 is now regarded as the most pronounced global challenges in socio-economic, political, health, and all the areas of our lives. So this is a real crisis, which many experts say that this is the most serious, worst crisis since the global depression. Global depression. So we have to be very careful to address, first of all, this COVID-19. Because of the COVID-19, this world has become even more difficult. For example, some statistics have been already announced that the United Nations estimate that more than 225 million people have lost full-time jobs around the world. Korean is no exception. More than 155 million people are now feeling insecure in their economic situations. And there is still, the serious problem is the number of people on the abject poverty line. What is abject poverty line? Is that according to World Bank, a person who lives with only $1.90 a day, that means with just 2001 in Korean currency, you have to live a day. Your 3 meals, your transportation, or water, whatever it may be. There are more than almost 700 million people who are living on the abject poverty line, according to World Bank. This is a huge challenge, gigantic challenge to meet the target by 2030. This SDG has made it clear that by the end of 2030, there should be nobody who will suffer from this abject poverty. There should be nobody who should die from preventable diseases. We have made quite significant progress in medicines, but there are still some diseases which cannot be prevented. But there are most of the diseases, most of the sickness can be prevented. So I'm now talking, UN is talking about there should be nobody who can die, who die from preventable diseases. And these are something, and there are again many school-aged children who are not able to go to school. And it is much more so, coupled with the COVID-19, most of the people, children living in developing countries cannot have access to remote learning. This is a challenge. So we have to do all to recover from this. Recovery process may be very arduous, very much difficult. And we have to make sure that we must build back better and greener. That's a vision of the United Nations. And I'm also working very hard. As was introduced by Professor Emeritus, I'm chairman and president of Global Green Growth Institute. This is to help developing countries so that they will make the economy greener and build back better. So now UN Sustainable Development Goals is a very tangible, scientifically proved goals. It has 17 goals, which has 169 targets, and it has more than 230 indices, so that we can calculate, we can compare whether these goals are now being implemented. So I think we have a good governance system. It's not because of the lack of governance. It's because of political will, lack of political will. So I'm just urging that all these global governance issues can be resolved through strengthening and reaffirming the political leadership. So when there is a political will, I think there is nothing which we cannot do. Thank you very much.
For your clear answer to her questions. Please, please sit down for a minute. And I would like to make short closing remarks before ending this session. Today, Professor Pindike analyzed the climate change issue with economic logics, while former Secretary General Mr. Ban dealt with the same issue of climate change with his real-world experiences. But both speakers' messages are consistent and clear. Although we may not have full information on the climate change, its potential impact on humans looks critical, and thus the earlier our action against climate risks is taken, the better to reduce the probable catastrophes. Finally, I noticed that they emphasize the importance of the environmental economists' role on this climate change issue. Now we end the keynote speech session. Thank you very much for you being with us for almost 1.5 hours. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Gai.
Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.